Hi folks out there in YouTube land. This is Reynolds coming to you from my new apartment in Hot Springs, Arkansas with a video titled The Real Question That Jesus Asked. I'm going to focus in on my laptop here. The three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all have a version of this question. What was going on here is Jesus was in the temple. There's only one temple, and for the last 1900 years or more, there hasn't been any temple. But Jesus was in the temple, and he was asked his authority, what his authority was to teach. Matthew has a version of this in chapter 21, verse 25. Mark in chapter 11, verse 30. Luke has this version in chapter 20, verse 4. A couple comments before I get into this question, a couple comments about these Gospels. If you want to know when these Gospels are written, expect to find varying answers. A general rule of thumb is that the oldest letters and the Catholic Church claim that Matthew was written first, and then Mark, and then Luke. Protestants, as a general rule of thumb, claim that Mark was written first, and then Matthew and Luke. So even the two divisions of Christianity, Protestantism and Catholicism, can't even agree on the order these Gospels were written, let alone the dates. Of these three Gospels, and of course the Nicene Council proclaimed these three plus John to be a Gospel, but only one book proclaims itself to be a Gospel, and that's Mark. Mark is the only book that proclaims itself to be a Gospel. Chapter 1, verse 1, and it proclaimed itself to be the Gospel. Further, the ending of Mark is missing. Now I claim it was stolen, but if you want to find out more about that, Google Gospel of Mark, missing ending. In my Bible here, I'll show you my Bible. Here's the end of Mark. Chapter 16, verse 8 is right up here. Anything after verse 8 is listed down here in a footnote. And that's because they know that this is not authentic. This was added to the Gospel of Mark at a later time, about 100 years later. So even the only book that calls itself a Gospel has this ending. I claim it was stolen. So what was the question that was being asked? Jesus was in the temple, and he was approached by the religious authorities, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. According to Matthew, it was the elders of the people, which I don't even know what that is. Mark and Luke just say elders. According to Matthew and Luke, Jesus was teaching in the temple, and there's only one temple. According to Mark, Jesus was just walking in the temple. To me, that's a big difference, if he was actually teaching at that time, or if he was just walking around in the temple. And the religious authorities asked Jesus what was his authority to teach. And Jesus, according to these three Gospels, and they all pretty much agree on this question, this is straight out of my Bible. This is word for word from Mark and Luke from my Bible. Matthew words it just a little bit differently, but it's the same meaning. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men? And there's two big problems with this question. Number one, it doesn't make any sense for Jesus to have asked this question. This question is a no-brainer. And number two, it doesn't make any sense that the religious authorities couldn't figure out how to answer this. Even John the Baptist himself claimed that there was somebody greater than him coming. So this is a no-brainer, that the baptism of John was from men. So Jesus didn't really ask this question. So what question did Jesus really ask? The religious authorities were challenging Jesus on his authority, so it seems very obvious to me that Jesus challenged them on their authority. John the Baptist was not the authority of the religious leaders. The authority of the religious leaders was Moses. Here is the real question that Jesus asked the religious leaders. Was Moses a man or a God? To this day, this remains the unanswerable question. Because if you answer that Moses was a God, that violates the monotheism, and which is Moses' commandment number 1, that there's only one God. That's heresy, punishable by death. And if you answer that Moses was a man, well then the law of Moses, the books of Moses, these first 5, these are called the books of Moses. And the law in here is called the law of Moses, not the law of God. If you answer that Moses was a man, then these books must be flawed. Here is the million-dollar question that Jesus really asked. And this remains the question to this day. Was Moses a man or a God? I'm Reynolds. Rap with you later.